Chapter 20, Arbitress. As 1390 got underway, Jagiello was desperately engaged in trying to prevent old enemies without and warring members of his family inside Lithuania's boundaries from undoing what he had accomplished in the past few years. In the east, Rus princes were continually plotting to make the most of his increased preoccupation with affairs of the United Kingdom. In the west, the order watched. No sooner did his ambitious brothers seem more or less satisfied with lands and positions allotted them, than one among them by some covetous act broke the precarious peace, thus furnishing the opportunity the outside foe waited to seize. It would have been far easier to control these brothers, had it not been for the ever-disturbing presence of their more clever, more ambitious cousin, Prince Vytautas, who aimed at nothing less than the mastery of Vilnius. Vytautas particularly resented Jagiello's hold on the beautiful Lake Troki lands, once the favorite property of his father, Kęstutis. He objected, indeed, to all of this cousin's advance in power, an advance deliberately designed by Jagiello to check his own. The two were ready to fly at each other's throats. "Beware of me, as I of you." Jagiello had sent him word by his servant Marfs. Had the king not been born in an atmosphere of turbulence, and had he been less a believer in his fortunate star, he might have despaired over this situation. Early in 1390, the order, reversing its policy, decided to invade Lithuania during the summer. Henry of England, who was to become Henry IV, arrived with 300 archers to join in the attack, along with Knight Bucocult of France, and men from Livland and others. Vytautas led the heathen Samogitians, to whom, with rare irony, the order guaranteed freedom in the practice of their pagan religion as a reward for aid in this war against now Christian Lithuanians. By September, the formidable force arrived before Vilnius and began a combined siege of the capital. It was a terrible year. Toward its close, Jagiello was forced to hurry north with a Polish army to retake castles captured by Vytautas. Vytautas' brother was killed, but he himself escaped to Prussia, only to return in 91 and again with the order as ally to lay siege to Vilnius. This attempt was one of the bloodiest ever witnessed in a land inured to sanguinary warfare. The breaches in the walls surrounding the chateau were filled with corpses. To intimidate its defenders, the head of Jagiello's brother Casimir was lifted on a pick before them. But in the end, both Vytautas and the order learned once again that the king's arm was stronger than their own. Yet in the new year, the order recrossed the Lithuanian border and destroyed the city of Grodno. The death of several of her sons and strife amongst others caused Jagiello's mother, Juliana, such grief that when early in the decade she died, it was in bitter pain over their hard fate. These rebellions and invasions troubled Jagiello not only as demonstrations of the yet divided state of his kingdom, but also because they destroyed so much that he had ardently undertaken. One of the most moving aspects of his activity as Western Christian king was his effort to carry to his northern people as quickly as possible the best that he found in the south. He had given them the Christian religion and their charter. Since then, he had been trying to turn the potential benefits of these gifts into experienced realities. Converts had to be kept in line. The powerful pagan priesthood, resisting desperately, were still in the endless force offering sacrifices to the old gods. It was to be expected that many Lithuanians were but externally converted. One does not doff and don his religion as he does his cloak. The prince ordered it, the puzzled neophyte said, so I prostrate myself before the Christ. But surely I am not obliged to deprive our ancient devils of the crumbs of my cheese, or the foam of my beer, or a roasted turnip. If they are discontented, my horses will break, calves catch the mange. My cows give blood instead of milk. My harvest rot where it stands. For some time, old beliefs would follow secretly close beside the new. Only step by step could the people truly be brought to Christ, just as only degree by degree could they truly win the liberties bestowed on them by the charter. Jagiello was impatient to see wide-spreading Vilnius beside the Villa transformed to a city of brick that could rank proudly with others. Where was another more beautifully environed by rolling wooded lands and shining lakes? He was continually planning for the new Christian capital he pictured, and in all of this planning, Jadwiga was his chief encourager and aid. He had begun the cathedral of St. Stanislaus, and among others, the fine churches of St. John and St. Martin, and was busy with projects for monasteries and hospitals, when these desolating wars cut across progress. In 1390, he wrote the Pope that the order had not only burned practically all of Vilnius, the ducal chateau on the hilltop had been saved by Polish soldiers arrived in the nick of time, but that they had also deliberately destroyed a splendid church he was building and used materials from it to throw a bridge across the Villa. Jadwiga felt as deeply as he the loss of this church. For months, needles had been stitching and knotting that it should lack no accessories. The Polish-Lithuanian court was one of the busiest in Europe. Jagiello never journeyed north without taking with him gifts of embroideries and other ornaments. Clearly, if Lithuania was to develop into a healthy member of the family of Western nations, there must be an end to invasion and rebellion. Before all else, there must be an end to the enmity between Vytautas and Jagiello, who was so strongly favored by Jagiello. Jadwiga had long hoped and worked for a reconciliation. Many influential persons outside were endeavoring to bring it about, chief among them the picturesque young Bishop Henry of Plock, half-brother of Duke Zamovit, who had a much greater flair for diplomatic than for ecclesiastical enterprise. When, earlier, Jagiello had sent him on a secret mission to Vytautas, he fell head over heels in love with Vytautas' attractive sister, Ringala, and throwing the celibacy rule to the winds, had married her. His career as married bishop formed one of the most romantic episodes of this romance-charged period. It was skillful Bishop Henry, then, who arranged with Jagiello's rebellious cousin that he should meet the king somewhere between Krakow and Vilnius to adjust these differences, which threatened the very life of the kingdom. They chose as the conference center a Lithuanian chateau at Ostrow, in Rus Lithuanian territory south of Vilnius, near the river Ditva. Bishop Henry dispatched the cheering word to Krakow. The members of Jagiello's family so greatly admired Jadwiga and had such confidence in her wisdom and fairness that the best pledge for the successful outcome of this meeting at Ostrow would be her presence there. So both the king and the queen made hurried preparations for the northeastward journey. They would have preferred not to be absent at the same time and for so long, but unquestionably they must go. The Council of the Crown and the two courts cooperated in every way to facilitate their departure. Among them were a few who remembered the time when King Louis's army had traveled in a similar direction to make war on the pagan wolf and his idolatrous people. Now his daughter was to ride forth with that wolf on a peace mission to Lithuania. They shut their eyes. These reversals were staggering. How lifted above all others she was, this 20-year-old queen of theirs, where in Europe was her equal. With all her loveliness of luxuriant hair and fresh-hued skin, and large wide-set eyes, her expression bespoke a firmness and decision which augmented a royal dignity. There was reverence, true affection, in the goodbyes that sent her north, and proud loyalty in the bearing of those who escorted her. It was the magical season of the year. The state coach and the wagons and horses clattered down Wawel hillside between flanking trees flecked with scarlet and gold. Asters and late roses bloomed in the bordering plots. About the villages beyond the capital spread rippling seas of heavy-headed rye and wheat. Orchards were sweet with apples. It would have been pleasant to give oneself to free enjoyment of the late summer landscape, but there could be no loitering. With anxious thoughts, king and queen pressed forward, and by early August were within the Lithuanian boundary. Now the forest stretches on either side of them were dark with fir and pine, and peopled by bear and wolves. In the towns, Christian spires gave way to the rounded cupolas of the Greek Orthodox Church. Everywhere the coming of the holy Jadwiga awakened profound emotion. People crowded to see her and to kneel as she passed, as if she were a saint arrived from the still more or less vague Western world. They held their sick children up to her, for had they not heard of the beggar covered with sores, neglected by all others, whom she had washed with her own hands until a light shone in the dark corner, and he rose, healed. From its appearance, Ostrau might have been in the middle of Russia. Buildings and costumes were completely Oriental. The women who crowded the streets with the men wore heavily embroidered short coats, full woolen skirts and boots, and on almost all their fingers rings of one metal or another. Some of the women were blue-eyed and white-throated. Others had dark eyes and braids wound coronal-wise. They, too, knelt and cheered and lifted their hands to the Holy Queen. Yes, she would visit their sick and their miserable, once the business of state was finished. The castle, set in spreading, heavy-scented gardens, was handsomely built and comfortably appointed. In the long meeting chamber, decorated with barbaric splendor, the group of hunters and warriors assembled, clad now in embroidered velvets and fine furs and jeweled ornaments, and accompanied by their wives, whose robes would have shone in any court of the East. Foremost among the women was Anna, Vytautas's clever and vivacious wife. Jadwiga had always felt as if a strong wind had blown into the room when these men of the north appeared. Today they suggested a hurricane. The four near walls seemed to stretch to the earth's frontiers as these adventurers who lived in their saddles in black forests and on perilous steppes, where a poisoned arrow or a death fall from a madly racing horse probably awaited each, gathered about her. The discussions were long, at times angry, then calmer. But as each memorable day closed, it showed more clearly than the preceding the confidence of all in the Queen and her sense of justice. And in the end, Vytautas and Jagiello were reconciled. Vytautas swore loyalty to the king, who promised to raise his title and to turn over to him the lands once held by his father Kęstutis. Anna pledged herself as security that her husband would live up to his promise. There seemed now to be definite hope of peace. On August 4th, 1392, this first agreement was solemnly recorded. Vytautas expressed his joy over the ending of old and bloody quarrels and vowed to remain eternally loyal to the Polish kingdom, Polish crown, and the Polish Queen Jadwiga. In addition, he declared that he would never know any sovereign other than herself, but on the contrary would contribute all his strength to her worship, benefit, power, and glory, as well as defend, protect, and shelter her from all enemies and opponents. But when Jagiello, who in compensation for the loss of the Troki lands had been given others about the many-templed city of Kiev, heard that his brother had made such an arrangement without first consulting him, as he had agreed to do, he was filled with anger, as were the other brothers who saw their position threatened. Imitating their cousin's earlier practice, they appealed to the ever-ready order to aid them to prevent the fulfillment of Jagiello's agreement with Vytautas. Thus things appeared worse than before. The royal pair had returned to Krakow, believing that the Lithuanian situation was well in hand. But each courier from the north brought black news. Jagiello's brother Wigund, very dear to him, had died of poison. Another warning that he himself must not abate vigilance. Then came word of Jagiello's opposition, with the report that trouble had broken out afresh among all the brothers. The king and queen faced this recurrent disruption with profound disquiet. However, Jadwiga's faith in the eventual success of conference and arbitration was undaunted. Another meeting must be arranged with all speed. With Vytautas and Jagiello together at Ostrau, some agreement could be worked out. Again, couriers flew back and forth across the Polish-Lithuanian border, and then again the sovereigns set out. Traveling by relays, they reached Ostrau in record time. In the crucial days which followed, Jadwiga's faith triumphed. The cousins were reconciled. Vytautas wrote a letter recording the fact that he and Jagiello had in her presence adjusted their differences. Furthermore, again rendering homage to her wisdom and magnanimity, The members of Jagiello's family agreed that in all future disagreements which might arise amongst them, Queen Jadwiga should be asked to arbitrate. A new period of settlement by arbitration with Jadwiga as Arbitress had begun. 5 documents registered the conciliatory steps by which the final broad agreement was reached. The little girl, who with her boy lover, beside the Danube, had listened shiveringly to tales of the heathen of the dark north, now as queen accepted this extraordinary investiture. Her own sense of usefulness and power must have been a balm to her great hurt. Heaven, which denied her a child, still vouchsafed approval in other ways.